Thanks in part to the moral panic of the 1980s, the word occultism, or the occult, has a mysterious and scary connotation to it. When the term is used, mental images like Anton LaVey sacrificing babies or satanic serial killers are evoked due to this reputation. Perhaps you're one of the History Channel motherfuckers whose first thought is the Nazi secret occult history, whether the conspiracy theory that they had any ties to magic, or the legitimate and weird history of the Thule Society. That may or may not have been overblown the past 100 years or whatever. This obfuscation of history is just one method occultism becomes an unnuanced force of evil. Let's look at how this works. I can't summarize the entire history of occultism, but I would like to show you the greatest hits, as it were. Occultism as an idea is effectively secret or esoteric supernatural knowledge, usually involving rituals, magic, and usually some sort of obscure pseudoscience or atypical religious belief. The magical and secretive aspects of occultism have existed, as far as we know, since religion itself. The ancient Egyptians, while their religion was state-sanctioned, dealt with a lot of secrets, magic, rituals, and a lot of fractured local beliefs and practices. What one city might consider a fundamental god, another may not have even heard of. Broadly speaking, the idea of secret knowledge or magic isn't really unique to occultists. It's fundamental to most religions. Atypical and even more secretive religious groups, known as mystery cults, have also existed for as long as religion itself, and until Christianity took over Europe, they were considered strange but accepted. Even after Christian hegemony, there were similar groups and systems like the Jesuits, Freemasons, and the Kabbalists that continued the secretive and magical properties of religion. So where do we get the modern idea of the pseudoscience occultism? In the 1800s and early 1900s, there was a rise in self-described occultists: Aleister Crowley, Thelema, Theosophists, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, a very strange Christian science magic group that Crowley was a member of for a time, and Eliphas Levi. Levi? I forgot to look this up. Just to name a few. All of these considered themselves occult, but none of them had the same ideas or practices. Levi, I'm just going to call him Levi. Levi considered the occult a fusion of religion, specifically a lot of Catholicism, and science. Crowley famously either created new religious ideas or borrowed from ancient ones, and theosophy, taking from multiple Asian religions, is incredibly complicated, and its creators didn't really want it to be as dogmatic, so it's hard to even say if what they wrote was even practiced by all theosophists. What ties all of these together under the banner of occultism, though? The atypical nature of these groups, as well as the embrace of contemporary science, was, at the time, modern incarnations of past cult-like groups. While on a technical level they were mere reincarnations of old ideas, the new wave in modernizing religion became what we consider the occult movement. The exact reasoning behind all of these groups emerging around the same time isn't easy to bring together, but what's important to note is that it wasn't coincidence they all appeared around the same time. From the French Revolution to just prior to World War I, there was a significant rise in new political and philosophical thought. This is when Marxism would begin, civil wars occurred through almost every continent, and political changes were the norm. This was a time period of a lot of big-brained thinky heads making up ideas for what they thought would be the best way to run the world, and taking action to try to make that happen. Naturally, the momentum of change carried into the religious realm as well. I would like to contend the occult movements were an expansion of this. It becomes clear when taking note of how a lot of beliefs of occultists I mentioned favored equality, freedom, and scientific progress. They were outdated ideas of science and equality nowadays, but at the time they were cutting edge. You can decide if you like if these were legitimate claims to religiosity or not, but considering they weren't usually doing more than publishing books and holding secret meetings, I don't think this was a movement of scammers. This is not easily comparable to the modern idea of cults, where a single man in charge forced everyone who followed him to live under a strict ideal system and to praise the leader. To me, at least, it appears like all of these occult thinkers were trying to modernize religion by making them more free and equitable. It would be a fair criticism to say that a lot of occultists at this time culturally appropriated much of their ideas. After all, this was a group of white Europeans, mostly men, but there were a large number of women, taking Asian, African, or Middle Eastern religions and or mysticisms and trying to introduce them to modern Euro-American readers. Sometimes they would phrase it as if they were attempting to revive ancient religions, but not always. With that in mind, I think it would be fair to say they usually had good intentions, but they didn't always act as best they could. Now, a lot of these occult ideas and groups weren't always mainstream. For some, that was the point. While these occultists were influential, they never took off the same way other movements did. They didn't survive against hegemony. Mainstream Christianity maintained its influence in areas these occult ideas initially spread, in no small part due to the lack of unifying narrative by varying occultists, but also due to an intense backlash against new religious movements. Not all of these occultists considered themselves occult, but rather new religious movements. But Christian backlash referring to them as cults quite literally demonized them until the label stuck. Crowley arguably became the most influential occultist and saw a slight resurgence of popularity in the 1960s and 70s, but it did not stick as a religious movement, more as a cultural idea. During this time, however, the definition of a cult would change, as Anton LaVey started up his religious Satanism, and many abusive cults such as the People's Temple, Heaven's Gate, and the Family came into being. There was another intense backlash. While the peak of this backlash wouldn't occur until the 1980s, from the 30s to the 70s there was a strong right-wing protest against non-Protestant religious influence in popular music, even if the musicians were Christian. New musicians aren't to blame for the moral panic, but they were targets in mainstream media people bothered to remember. Let's look at the actual cause of the panic. There was a rise in conservative Christianity throughout religious circles, and recently politics. As these conservative Christians became more prominent and numerous, they found their way into influential industries. A number of Christian psychotherapists would diagnose demon possessions and blame satanic rituals for child abuse, including Lawrence Pazder, names, and his patient-turned-wife, Michelle Smith, who wrote a book called Michelle Remembers, in which the two asserted that a cult known as the Church of Satan, not to be confused with the real Church of Satan, which was older than Christianity, abused Michelle as a child, but you couldn't tell just by looking at her because Jesus healed her scars. That's actually what they said. They got this information by using hypnosis, a practice academically disputed for its use to reinforce biases. After its publication, the book was highly criticized for being bullshit. People who knew Michelle during the time of the alleged abuse noted that much of the events stated in the book just didn't happen. If she was the subject of a ritual in a graveyard surrounded by houses, people would have noticed. Some of her supposed memories were compared to Yoruban ceremonies, an area of interest Lawrence had, but they were actually more similar to other more popular non-Christian practices, some I Ching. I really should have done more research on this. Divination and geomancy. He would make references to Yoruban practices and connect them with Satanism, effectively demonizing, again literally, both non-Christian religious practices and what he deemed as a cult. Unsurprisingly, Aton LaVey sued them for libel because of the whole Church of Satan thing, which made the authors retract their statements that the Church of Satan was behind the abuse. Despite the obvious discrepancies, believers latched on and requested all kinds of anti-satanic services from Lawrence and other psychotherapists. Daycare services across America got caught up in this and were accused of being in on the conspiracy. Everyone was a pedophile and Satanist in these days, not just metal bands. It's easy to look back and laugh at the wacky idiots pretending to know what occultism is, but this caused a lot of harm and actual abuse across the country. To me, the most shocking element of all this is that it happened in a pre-internet age, and a pre-QAnon age. America got caught up in a satanic pedophile conspiracy that was obviously a scam with no basis in fact. In the 1980s, there was a lot of people out there saying the country suddenly got too far into conspiracy theories, thanks to the rise of the internet, but this country has always been consumed by bullshit beliefs in its entire history. Salem witch trials, Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence, I really hope I can make a video on that sometime. The belief that Lincoln was going to take the slaves away, the USS Maine, McCarthyism, 9/11, Obama, just everything about Obama. And today we have pretty much the same thing, but when there's people crying over an imaginary threat, some people see a monetary opportunity. This is Simon's Necronomicon. I always expected it to be bigger, like, I don't know, in hardcover, but no, this is mass market paperback and it's really small. Like, here's my PSP for scale. Don't ask. It's called Simon's Necronomicon because it was allegedly found by a guy known only as Simon, despite it being written by Abdul al-Hazred, as mentioned by Lovecraft. This book has several aspects that are important to note. It makes some claims about religion, its publisher was not Simon, and it's published on paperback. Firstly, the book talks a lot about religion. Not just fake Lovecraft religion, but rather that Lovecraft was influenced by... Why did I say it like that? That Lovecraft was influenced by Sumerian history, and that he and Crowley both talked about the same gods. They just used different names. Cthulhu, you see, was also referenced by Crowley as Cthulhu 666, and found in ancient Sumerian religion as Cthulhu. The Ancient Ones were known to Crowley as Satan, and the Sumerians as Tiamat. The pieces written by Abdul al-Hazred mentioned that he witnessed all kinds of horrifying events by occultists, from terrifying rituals to monsters. Most of the book is a bunch of spells you can do to summon these monsters, but like, why would you? It's stated multiple times they'll just kill you if you do, and if you do the ritual wrong, you'll die anyway. There's also a tangent in the book about how the Bible just blatantly stole from Sumerian and Greek religions because the compilers of the ancient Bible were Greek, and they just used a bunch of already existing ideas and images that just applied to Christianity now. I know I'm trying to present this book as having found some secret truth, but this is like the only part that's on to something. I wouldn't say it's entirely accurate to say Christianity stole all of its ideas from others, and some of the claims in this book aren't totally historically backed by evidence, but some of them are. Like how the Gospel of Mark was given the symbol of the winged lion, which was a common symbol in pagan religions such as the Lamassu in Sumer and the Sphinx in Egypt. Well, since I broke character. The claims this book made are completely false. There certainly was some connections between Crowley, Lovecraft, and the ancient Sumerian religion. Lovecraft used Dagon as a word for one of his gods, as well as getting Cthulhu from the Greek chthonic gods. And Crowley has a lot of obvious ancient Egyptian influence on Thelema. Thelema? Ah, fuck. Despite this, there were no Sumerian gods named Cthulhu. Crowley never had a Cthulhu 666, but he did refer to himself as the Beast 666 to jokingly play into the stereotype that he was a Satanist. The spells, if they could have worked at all, were written in the distinction that you had to pronounce everything 100% correctly, despite stating that this was an English translation of an original manuscript. Plus, the original manuscript wasn't even complete. This book isn't real, and it knows it isn't. If they had found the real Necronomicon, I doubt it would have been published in mass paperback without consequences. Then again, the 1980s happened. Speaking of it getting published, the second thing to note is that the introductory sections, taking a significant portion of the book, describe the difficulties the publishers and translators had with the manuscript. Some dying, some going missing, others tormented by its horrors. Of course, this is all invented for the book to build it up as a dark force, when in reality it's just a cheap scare. It's cute and fun, and way more interesting than the spell section, which mostly consists of, "In the name of Enki, remember," for 200 pages. Throughout the introductions, we are told a certain Simon, who, acting with other colorful and mysterious characters, compiled the books we ended up with. For years there was no clear indication as to who these people were, other than potential pseudonyms, imaginary individuals, or people who legitimately helped create the book. Okay, that's not true. There was in fact a suspected author. Peter LaVey, writer of Nazi occult history, Lovecraft, and occultism, was said to have been the author by multiple people who claimed to be his friend. There's a lot of interesting stories out there about how Peter was too shy to reveal himself as Simon and asked friends to go to book signings for him, and how he was a Thelemist who, a Crowley occultist, fuck you, who used the cold Machiavellian tactics to pose as a savvy businessman in the midst of a sex and drug-crazed occult circle to get his book published. It's up to you if you believe these claims. I won't suggest that they're true or false, but rather that they all build up to this idea that Peter LaVey was Simon. At this point in time, almost 30 years after the book's initial publication, people started talking as a fact Peter LaVey wrote Simon as a character, as a hoax to trick occultists. I mean, he's in the acknowledgments of the beginning of the book. Here, I'll even show you. To the ever-changing staff of translators who performed a most distasteful and oft-times unsatisfying task. They call him the Dark Lord of the Underworld, but Mr. Peter LaVey. Until, that is, Simon made the mistake of coming back. In 2005 and 2006, In 2005 and 2006, Simon released two new books, Dead Names, The Dark History of the Necronomicon, and Gates of the Necronomicon. Gates contained more spells and is irrelevant for this discussion, but Dead Names isn't alleging to be part of the Necronomicon. It's words straight from Simon's mouth, declaring that any attempt to discover his identity have so far failed, and that he's still hidden. If this wasn't already an obvious, "Nuh-uh, it's not me, look, Simon said it wasn't me," the books were listed in the United States Copyright Office as being written by Peter Levenda using Simon as a pseudonym. Once again, we see fraudulent claims of authority on some occult manner. It's up to you if you consider what Peter did as wrong or just having fun. I can say with some certainty it's fun to invent characters and write from their point of view, but I've never gone to the extent of having to, say, publish it. Let us now get into the third item. The fact that it's paperback. It was originally published as a hardback, which I believe was the only version of this book in hardback, and it's incredibly rare nowadays. However, soon it was published in paperback by Avon Publishing, a well-known comics and paperback publisher. It should be stated outright that paperback is the cheapest form of book publishing, especially what's called mass market paperback, like how this book is published. It feels like it weighs nothing. The ink is sometimes printed poorly, and the pages bend and tear easily. Truly, capitalism has shown us modern innovation. What's significant about this is that you will notice a lot of occult books are published like this, from Anton LaVey's Satanic Bible to Wicca and astrology books, from tarot explanations to various New Age how-to spell books. Meanwhile, the Bible is printed in the most durable, thin paper as possible, preventing it from even being destroyed in fires in some situations. Why, then, is the Necronomicon, a book alleging that if you dare harm its words, evil will befall you, is published in the cheapest, most destructible kind of print available? To make money, obviously. The back of this book and its summaries on the internet all point to how genuine and scary the book is when it's blatantly inconsistent. The book is still being sold online despite how the book is famous for not being real. But it is real. It's right. Now, look, I can't prove the Necronomicon was published purely as a monetary thing. I'm sure it was a fun passion project that just happened to make Avon a lot of money. But when you look at all kinds of occult writings, you start to see the same incentive for money over religious truth. Aton LaVey, paperback. When you go outside the realm of fake evil, you see hundreds of books explaining how tarot works, despite resources existing online to teach you this, as well as incredibly thin books of spells that ultimately say nothing of value. Why? Because it's cheap and it makes money, and because people will buy it. Hell, Simon's Necronomicon is under the Ancient and Controversial Knowledge section on Amazon, which also contains Chariots of the Gods, the original Ancient Aliens conspiracy book, as well as a lot of, obviously, Wicca and tarot books, because of course, and some horrendously upfront Christian scam books, like, scary obvious. I'm not implying Simon's Necronomicon is a conspiracy theory book. What I'm getting at is that this is something teens buy to be edgy and play around with, or in my case, because you have an interest in atypical religious practices. Look, this book has made a lot of money over the years, and it will continue to do so. Occult books have a huge market. People who make these books know there will be a market for people buying them to anger the mainstream Christian point of view, and Christians will talk about loudly how evil the book is, giving them free advertising, and hate buying them to burn them. There will be true believers who hope to find some truth in the universe in these books, and they will be tricked. The reason I know Simon's Necronomicon is made up the Sumerian god Cthulhu is because I'm an ancient historian. Teenage occultists desperate for an alternative to Christianity are not going to notice all of this. I get it. As a teen, losing my faith in Christianity, I reached out to LaVeyan Satanism, alternative religions, occult magic, the works. And what I got was not what I needed. These books are mechanizations of capitalism. They exist to fill a quota of products sold, and they do this by riding the coattails of conspiracy theories, abuse, and small religious movements. My intention is not to make you feel bad for liking occultism or modern occultist literature. I thoroughly enjoyed Simon's Necronomicon as a piece of horror fiction and as an interesting commentary on religion. I didn't like the spell part of the book, though. I think, however, for me to come to terms with why I enjoy reading about occultism, I have to recognize that a majority of modern occult literature is not religious in nature. It's monetary. The modern lens of what is occultism often ignores the genuine religious aspect of the ideas and focuses more on the deviancy, the non-Christianness of the writing and practices. I believe there can be more to occultism than being edgy and anti-Christian. I want to teach that religion can, in fact, be religious. Thanks for watching!